The federal courthouse in Denver shook with the chants of protesters gathered outside, raising banners demanding justice for immigrants. Press cameras flashed relentlessly, cutting through the heavy summer air. Inside, the courtroom was tense and nearly silent, with dim light seeping through the marble columns and the faint scent of polished wood filling the space. Tom H. Homan entered, his black suit pressed and his steady gaze scanning the room. Across from him, Judge Edward Callahan sat on the bench, wearing a smug smile, his cold eyes locked on Homan. Callahan had recently issued an order halting deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. However, Homan, representing the Trump administration's firm stance on border security, had pressed forward, setting the stage for a major legal confrontation. Reporters whispered among themselves, pens moving rapidly as they sensed an imminent clash. Homan stood firm, hands clenched, fully aware that Callahan was prepared to challenge him aggressively. But Homan was no ordinary official. He had studied the law thoroughly, prepared every detail, and carried a pivotal argument that could change everything. Callahan struck his gavel sharply, his voice firm. "We begin." The room grew even more tense, all eyes locked on Homan. He knew this was far more than a courtroom hearing, it was a battle for justice. Callahan, convinced of an easy victory, would soon realize he underestimated his opponent. Homan was not merely an administrator, he was a legal strategist. Before we dive deeper into this case, comment where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our latest stories. The atmosphere in the Denver courtroom felt electric, as if it were moments away from erupting. Tom H. Homan stood unwavering at the defendant's table, his gaze firmly set on Judge Callahan, who presided from the bench with a barely concealed air of superiority. The scratching of reporters' pens filled the silence. The audience, from passionate activists to curious citizens, sat motionless, sensing an intense legal battle about to unfold. Callahan leaned forward, his voice sharp and cutting. "Mr. Homan, do you truly believe you can justify defying my order? Are you a legal expert, or simply a blind servant to political interests?" His words, dripping with sarcasm, were clearly designed to unsettle. Murmurs stirred in the gallery, with some nodding in agreement while others frowned at the judges. Homan, however, remained composed. His face tightened slightly, but his voice was steady and clear. "Your Honor, I acted within the bounds of the law," he said firmly, "specifically under the Alien Enemies Act, which grants the government authority to deport in the interest of national security. I stand not to boast, but to defend lawful action." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom before continuing. "The real question is why this court seeks to block a statute that has stood the test of time." The room seemed to freeze. For a moment, the gravity of his words sinking in. Homan was not merely defending his actions, he was openly challenging the authority of the judge. Callahan's expression shifted, a brief flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Quite daring of you, Mr. Homan," Callahan remarked, his tone sharp as ice. "But you are an enforcer, not a legal scholar. Or have you been secretly studying law, after hours?" A few chuckles echoed from the gallery, fueling Callahan's growing confidence. He waved his hand dismissively, signaling Homan to proceed. "Explain yourself, if you can." Homan stood tall, his eyes never wavering from Callahan's. He had expected this approach, the judge's need to assert control and belittle him. But Homan was prepared. "Your Honor, let's discuss legal precedent," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "In Chai Chanping vs. United States, 1889, the Supreme Court upheld the government's authority over immigration as a matter of national sovereignty. The Alien Enemies Act strengthens this principle, allowing deportations in cases of national security threats. My actions fit squarely within that legal framework." He stepped forward slightly, his tone low but forceful. "What I find concerning is why this court seeks to block a right long recognized by the highest law of the land." The room fell into complete silence. Reporters froze, pens hovering midair. The audience sat rapt, drawn in by Homan's precise argument. Callahan clenched his fists, tapping his fingers on the bench in a subtle effort to hide his unease. He had not expected Homan to present precedent so effectively. Precedent aside, Callahan countered sharply. You disobeyed a direct order. That's contempt of court, Mr. Homan, not legal brilliance. Before Homan could respond, his attorney, Rebecca Letton, rose to her feet. A former prosecutor with a reputation for turning difficult cases around, Rebecca carried herself with sharp, unwavering confidence. With the court's permission, she began, her voice soft but cutting, there is a larger concern. Under 28 U.S.C. Section 455, a judge must recuse themselves if any appearance of bias exists. We have reason to believe that connections between this court and advocacy groups may compromise its impartiality. Her statement dropped like a bomb in the courtroom, casting doubt over Callahan's integrity. His face darkened. That is a serious allegation, Ms. Letton, he snapped, his voice shaking slightly. You had better have proof, or both of you will face contempt charges. Despite the threat, Rebecca didn't flinch. She exchanged a quick glance with Homan, signaling they were ready. Homan stepped forward, seizing the moment. We have evidence. Your Honor, he said, his voice firm and measured. And it doesn't just concern your recent order. It concerns broader conduct in this courtroom, where outcomes appear influenced before proceedings even begin. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. The audience sensed that a major revelation was about to unfold. Callahan froze, his hand still midair, a flash of panic in his expression. Homan's mind briefly flashed back to a humid night in 2018 when Callahan, during a congressional hearing, publicly labeled him heartless, making him a target for intense criticism. That memory only steeled his resolve. Since then, Homan had dedicated himself to mastering the law, preparing for a confrontation like this. Callahan, thinking he faced the same man from years ago, was gravely mistaken. Regaining some composure, Callahan spoke, his voice frigid. You're treading dangerously, Mr. Homan. This court will not entertain slander. Present your evidence or end this spectacle. The challenge was clear, though Callahan's voice betrayed a hint of fear. Rebecca leaned toward Homan and whispered, He's rattled. We're on the right track. Homan gave a slight nod, his focus unbroken. He knew the next step would reshape everything. The courtroom felt ready to ignite. Every eye fixed on him. In the crowd, Laia Martinez, a young investigative reporter, scribbled notes furiously. She had followed Homan's career, initially skeptical but now deeply impressed. Texting her editor, she wrote, Homan's about to blow this case wide open. Possible judicial scandal incoming. Sending the message, she leaned forward, pen ready to capture every moment. The tension reached its peak, the air thick with anticipation. Homan took a deep breath and spoke clearly. Your Honor, we present a sworn affidavit from Daniel Foster, a court employee detailing your communications with the Global Justice Initiative. And that's only the beginning. The words hit like a thunderclap. Shocked whispers rippled through the gallery. Callahan paled, his hands gripping the bench tightly. Homan pressed on. These communications were not merely inappropriate. They were orchestrated to influence this very case. We have emails, audio recordings, and a witness prepared to testify. Would you like us to proceed? The question hung in the air, a challenge impossible to ignore. Callahan stared at Homan, his eyes flickering between rage and panic, desperately searching for a way out. The courtroom sank into an almost unbearable silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Finally, Callahan muttered, barely audible, This is absurd. But Callahan's voice wavered, stripped of its usual command. The audience felt it, he was faltering, and Homan was only getting started. Tom H. Homan stood unwavering, his piercing gaze locked onto Judge Edward Callahan, who struggled to maintain the crumbling facade of authority. The murmurs in the gallery faded to a heavy silence, but the tension thickened, clinging to the walls. Reporters hunched over their notepads, ready to capture the moment, sensing that Homan had not yet played his strongest card. Callahan struck his gavel sharply, the sound slicing through the air, an attempt to reassert control. Mr. Homan, he said, forcing steadiness into his voice, Your accusations are serious. If you have the evidence you claim, present it now. Otherwise, I will deem this harassment of the court." The words sounded stern, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering uncertainty, measuring how far Homan was willing to push. Homan gave a faint, confident smile. No arrogance, just the calm of a man who had prepared meticulously for this moment. For months, he had immersed himself in legal doctrine, studying every page of Callahan's immigration rulings, dissecting administrative decisions, meeting with law professors at Georgetown who were astonished by his mastery of precedent like Fongyeting v. United States. Homan hadn't just learned the law, he had turned it into a weapon. "We will present evidence, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady as iron. "But first, I would like to ask why this court rushed to halt deportations without fully considering the national security context." The question landed like a blade to Callahan's confidence. He frowned, gripping the gavel tighter. But before he could answer, Rebecca Leeton rose smoothly to her feet, her hair neatly pinned back, her eyes sharp as steel. She radiated the quiet authority of someone who had made even seasoned federal judges tread carefully. "Your Honor," she began, her voice soft but lethal, "I respectfully request to raise an additional point. Under Health Services Acquisition Corp. in 1988, a judge must recuse if even the appearance of bias exists. We have credible grounds to believe the court's decisions were influenced by undisclosed relationships." Her words rippled across the courtroom like a stone cast into still water, leaving stunned silence in their wake. Callahan shot up from his chair, his voice rising sharply, nearly losing composure. "Ms. Leeton, what exactly are you accusing me of? This is an outrageous insult." Yet for all his bluster, a flicker of panic crossed his face. Rebecca didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, her tone still calm. "We're not accusing, Your Honor, we are questioning. And that question will be answered with evidence, specifically from an employee of this court." Daniel Foster's name hadn't been spoken aloud yet, but his presence hung over the room like a gathering storm. Months earlier, Foster, a quiet, meticulous court clerk, had stumbled across irregularities. How Callahan had handled briefs from the Global Justice Initiative. One night, while cleaning the office late, Foster overheard Callahan on the phone, promising an unnamed caller, "Don't worry, the ruling will go the right way." Those words haunted Foster, gnawed at his conscience until he came forward with a detailed affidavit. Today, he sat quietly in the gallery, his heart pounding, knowing the truth he carried was about to shatter everything. Homan felt the shift in the room, Callahan's iron grip loosening. "Your Honor," Homan said, his voice striking the room like a hammer, "we don't just have statements, we have documents, we have recordings, we have a witness ready to testify here and now. The question is, will you allow us to make it public, or would you prefer to explain yourself first?" His words rolled across the courtroom like a chill wind, making the gallery shudder. Reporters scratched away at their pads feverishly, knowing history was unfolding before them. From the corner, Laia Martinez, the young investigative reporter, scribbled furiously. She had followed this case out of curiosity, but now she realized she was witnessing something monumental. Homan wasn't merely a hard-nosed official. He was a strategist ready to challenge an entire system. She quickly texted her editor, "Homan's about to deliver the final blow." Callahan's breaking. Then she dropped her phone and leaned forward, her eyes locked on Homan. At the bench, Callahan tried to rally. "Mr. Homan, this is my final warning," he said, voice trembling despite his best efforts. "These statements insult the dignity of this court. If you lack concrete evidence, both you and your attorney will face serious consequences." But the threat was hollow, a feeble breeze before an incoming storm. His hands trembled slightly. His eyes darted anxiously across the courtroom, searching in vain for a way out. Homan's gaze remained locked on him, steady and unrelenting. Rebecca leaned in and whispered, "He's rattled. Now's the time for the knockout." Homan nodded slowly, the gleam of certainty in his eyes. He had trained for this moment for years, not to save his own skin, but to expose the truth. "We are ready, Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying like a battle cry. "And what we will present will command the attention of the entire nation." The tension in the room surged, crackling like fire about to consume dry brush. Homan didn't stand there as a defendant anymore. He stood as a warrior, poised to smash through Callahan's wall of deception. And somewhere in the packed gallery, Daniel Foster clenched his fists, knowing that his decision to come forward was about to change everything. Every eye was on Tom Homan, every breath held, as he prepared to unleash the blow that would bring the mighty Judge Edward Callahan to his knees. The murmurs from the gallery had vanished, replaced by a suffocating silence, as if the entire world was holding its breath before an inevitable explosion. Reporters sat tensely, pens hovering, ready to capture the moment history would turn. Judge Callahan cleared his throat, grasping at the remnants of his authority. "Mr. Homan," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, as if dragging time itself, "you and your attorney have made bold accusations, but words are cheap. If you have evidence, lay it out now, or I will end this charade." The threat echoed, but it carried no true force, like a hollow gust rattling the ruins of a broken door. Callahan's eyes searched Homan's face for any flicker of doubt, but found only a gaze of cold, unyielding steel. Homan didn't rush. He let the silence swell, pressing down on Callahan like an invisible weight. Then, with slow precision, he reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick stack of papers, holding them high for the courtroom to see. "Your Honor," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "this is a sworn affidavit from Daniel Foster, an employee of this court, detailing your secret communications with the Global Justice Initiative, an advocacy group with a direct stake in this case." The gallery erupted, murmurs crashing like waves against stone. Callahan's mouth opened, a protest forming, but Homan pressed on. "Foster didn't just overhear you, Your Honor," Homan continued, his words slicing through the rising noise. "He documented it." Homan set the papers carefully on the table, then produced a small USB drive from his pocket, holding it up like a live grenade. "This," he said, his voice low and devastating, "contains emails between you and a Global Justice Initiative leader. It includes discussions about altering legal briefs before submission. And," he added, letting the room hang on, "it contains a recording from a meeting you thought was private. Shall we play it now?" The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters scrambling for better views, pens scratching furiously across paper. Callahan's lips tightened into a thin line, his hands clutching the edge of his bench like a man gripping the last ledge above a pit. This is fabrication," he shouted, but the desperation in his voice only exposed the truth. "You can't bring fabricated evidence into court," he cried, but no one believed him. His fear was palpable. Rebecca Letton, standing beside Homan, stepped forward, her presence a sharpened blade. "Your Honor," she said with lethal calm, "we've verified everything. And it's not just Daniel Foster. Emily Johnson, formerly of the Global Justice Initiative, is prepared to testify." Rebecca pulled out another sheaf of documents, her voice ringing with conviction. "These are internal communications," she said, "confirming you accepted indirect funding from a financier to influence your rulings. They don't just show bias, Your Honor. They prove grave violations of judicial ethics." The courtroom froze in collective shock. In the gallery, Emily Johnson sat silently, her heart pounding against her ribs. Once an idealist, she had believed in the initiative's mission, until she stumbled on corruption, secret deals, and betrayal. Turning over the evidence to Homan had cost her countless sleepless nights, but now, seeing him stand unbroken, she knew she had chosen the right side. Rebecca's voice cut through the stunned air like a judge's gavel. "By violating 28 U.S.C. paragraph 455, not just through action, but by concealing it, you have forfeited your place on this bench. We demand your immediate recusal." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Some spectators stood, others whispered urgently. A few simply stared in disbelief. Callahan shook his head violently, as if trying to deny reality itself. "I will not be humiliated in my own courtroom," he bellowed. But the crack in his voice betrayed him. He darted his eyes around, searching for allies among his court staff, but met only lowered gazes, silent rejections. He turned his rage toward Homan, his voice burning with resentment. "You think you can destroy me?" he hissed. "You have no idea who you're up against." Homan stepped forward, his presence calm, inevitable. "I'm not here to destroy anyone, Your Honor," he said, his voice like the slow turn of a key in a lock. "I'm here to reveal the truth, and the truth is, you corrupted justice for your own gain." He let the words sink in, each syllable a hammer blow. "You picked the wrong man to silence." The blow landed with finality. Callahan staggered, as if physically struck, slumping into his chair, his face drained of color. His authority, the invincible armor he wore for years, crumbled to dust. Across the room, Laia Martinez clutched her pen with trembling hands, scribbling furiously. She could barely contain her excitement. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a seismic rupture in the judicial system. She texted her editor breathlessly. "Homan just brought Callahan down. This is the story of the year." In the gallery, Daniel Foster felt a weight lift off his chest. Months of guilt, fear, sleepless nights, all washed away by the undeniable force of the truth. Yet beneath the relief, a cautious fear still lingered. The repercussions were yet to come. Rebecca leaned close to Homan, whispering in a voice only he could hear, "We've won this battle. Now let him bury himself." Homan gave a slow nod, his gaze never leaving the ruined man before him. He knew the war was far from over, but this moment, this victory, was justice at work. Callahan, like a trapped animal, made a final, desperate attempt. "I declare this trial adjourned," he shouted, pounding the gavel again and again. But the blows sounded feeble, hollow, like a man drowning in the tide. He staggered from his seat, black robes swirling, and practically fled the courtroom, leaving a whirlwind of chaos behind him. Reporters raced for the exits, phones to their ears, voices rising in urgent calls. The gallery buzzed, some in applause, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Homan stood still, unmoving, his eyes following Callahan's retreating figure. There was no triumph in his expression, only grim resolve. This wasn't a personal victory. It was a stand for something far greater, justice itself. But deep down he knew, beyond the walls of this courtroom, the true battle was just beginning. The evidence Tom H. Homan unleashed didn't just shatter the Denver courthouse. It sent shockwaves all the way to Washington. As the heavy doors slammed shut behind Judge Edward Callahan, their echo hung in the air like a death toll. The courtroom still trembled, as if the very earth had cracked beneath their feet. Homan stood silently at the defendant's table, face unreadable, offering no hint of triumph. Around him, the gallery erupted into chaos, reporters shouting into phones, cameras flashing like lightning, and the stunned murmurs of the crowd swelling like a storm. Callahan's fall wasn't just a scandal, it was an earthquake, and the aftershocks were already rolling. Within the hour, the Department of Justice descended on Callahan's office. Agents swarmed through the halls, their arms full of boxes, laptops, and thick files. One agent, eyes narrowing, slipped a small, unmarked USB into a plastic evidence bag. Callahan stood helpless in the corridor, his black robe hanging off him, like a funeral shroud. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, just a broken whisper lost in the rising wind. Outside, the protesters roared louder. Signs that once demanded justice for immigrants now chanted a new cry. "Callahan must go." Leila Martinez, her hands flying over her phone, blasted out a breaking post tagged Judicial Gate, her video of Callahan's crumbling exit spreading like wildfire. Within minutes, CNN, Fox, and countless others were ablaze with headlines. "Federal Judge Exposed for Corruption. Homan, Hero or Avenger." In a small church not far from the chaos, Maria Rodriguez knelt before the altar, fingers clutching, a rosary tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Her children's futures hang by a thread because of Callahan's rulings. Now, hearing of his downfall, she whispered through tears, "Please, God, save them." Meanwhile, Daniel Foster sat in the gallery's shadowed corner, hands trembling as he read a text from an unknown number. "Thank you, Foster. You did the right thing." Relief flooded him, but fear still clung to his ribs like cold iron. He had risked everything, his job, his safety, and the road ahead was anything but clear. Outside, Emily Johnson pushed her way through the crowd, her heart pounding. Her former colleagues from the Global Justice Initiative stared at her with betrayal in their eyes. "Traitor," someone muttered. She lowered her gaze, but her resolve stayed firm. She had once believed in the cause, until she saw the corruption that rotted its core. The memory of a crying child in a detention center had given her the strength to walk away and to stand with Homan, whatever the cost. Leela caught up to Emily in the chaos, shoving a microphone in front of her. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice urgent. Emily swallowed hard, then answered, her voice quivering but clear. "Because the vulnerable deserve real justice, not lies dressed up as compassion." Her words hit social media like a lightning bolt, fueling new hashtags. "Sue Homan the genius." She justice betrayed in a nearby bar. A truck driver pounded his beer on the counter, shouting, "Homan did it!" Finally, someone put those corrupt judges in their place. Cheers rose around him. But across the room, a group of college students argued fiercely, some claiming Homan was just another enforcer of harsh policies, others calling him a whistleblower. The divide grew, but no one could deny it. Homan had shaken the system to its core. Back in the courtroom, Rebecca Lutton touched Homan's shoulder lightly. "We've opened a door they can't close," she said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. Homan nodded, his eyes far away, already seeing the battles ahead. "If Washington wants a fight," he said, his voice low and cold, "I'm ready." In a darkened office somewhere far from the courthouse, Edward Callahan sat slumped before a glowing phone screen. A single message blinked on his display. "Step down, Edward. You can't beat Homan." Callahan turned off the screen, face pale, hands shaking. All the secret meetings, the backroom deals, gone in a heartbeat. Meanwhile, social media exploded. A viral post screamed, "Homan isn't just taking down one judge, he's taking on the entire system." It was a war cry that echoed through every home, every street, every courtroom. At a law school in New York, a professor paused his lecture to address the case. "This is a warning," he told his students. "Justice isn't in a robe or a gavel, it's in the truth. And the truth always finds a way out." Outside the courthouse, Homan stepped into the sunlight. The protest crowds were still roaring, the chaos still swirling, but he didn't flinch. He walked through it all, steady as a mountain. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And deep inside him burned a fire that no scandal, no threats, no power could ever extinguish. The truth was worth everything. Across the city, across the country, across screens and headlines, the name Tom H. Homan echoed. Not as a man, but as a force that had dared to pull back the curtain and reveal the fragile, broken system hiding behind it. Meanwhile, Daniel Foster, who had risked everything to expose Callahan, found fleeting moments of solace amid the media whirlwind. One morning, a letter arrived, handwritten and worn from travel. "Mr. Foster, thank you for daring to speak the truth," it read. "I served to protect this country, and you protected justice." It was from a Texas veteran. Foster, reading it under the soft light of his new, sparse apartment, felt a lump rise in his throat. He tucked the letter into a drawer as if locking away a piece of fragile hope, but fear still walked beside him. He had moved far from Denver, traded familiarity for shadows, glancing over his shoulder every time he stepped outside. He knew he had done the right thing, but the cost of truth weighed heavy, keeping him living quietly, almost invisibly. Emily Johnson, the former Global Justice Initiative employee, bore her own scars. Publicly, some posts hailed her a silent hero, but privately the attacks were brutal. "Traitor," one former colleague spat in a message she never answered. Sitting alone in her small apartment scrolling through headlines about the case, Emily thought of the children she had once met inside bleak detention centers. One little girl had clung to her waist, her tiny voice trembling. "Will you save me?" That memory burned inside Emily like a secret promise, a promise she kept when she handed over the evidence to Homan, even if it meant exile from her own community. From her own apartment, Laia Martinez refused to let the story die. Her latest article, Homan and the Truth Behind Judicial Gate, tore through social media, shared thousands of times. Beneath it, a comment stood out. "Thank you, Laia, for bringing the truth to light." She smiled, but it was a brief victory. She knew this was only the beginning. As she sipped cold coffee and stared at a growing list of names on her screen, she wondered, was Callahan just the beginning? Or was the entire foundation cracked? The aftershocks from Denver turned into a tsunami crashing into Washington, D.C. The city, used to secrets and silence, could no longer ignore the tremors. Homan's takedown of Judge Callahan wasn't just a scandal. It was a catalyst, igniting a political war where senators, activists, and officials fought to control the narrative. In a shadowy office on Capitol Hill, Senator John Harrow gathered his advisors. Before him lay damning documents, Callahan's emails, Foster's affidavit, Martinez's articles. His silver hair caught the light as he spoke in a voice like a blade. "We can't let this fade away," he said. He proposed a bill to reform judicial oversight, aiming to cut the strings between advocacy groups and judges. "If a federal judge can be bought," Harrow warned, "the entire system is crumbling." His advisors murmured their agreement, though one warned of liberal backlash. Harrow only smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "Let them scream," he said. "The truth is on our side." Meanwhile, at the DOJ, investigators worked into the early hours, sifting through seized computers, hunting through hidden files. A single email, buried deep, hinted at shadowy funding flowing through fake charities to corrupt judges. Homan opened Pandora's box. An agent whispered to a colleague over coffee, "God knows what else we'll find." In a hidden government building on the outskirts of the city, Homan and Rebecca Leon sat across from grim-faced DOJ officials. The senior agent, his steel-rimmed glasses reflecting the dim light, leaned forward. "Mr. Homan," he said, "you changed the game, but we need more." Without hesitation, Homan placed a fresh set of documents on the table. Foster's handwritten notes, new email chains from Emily Johnson. Rebecca added softly, "We have proof they tried to bury this." The agent nodded, eyes gleaming. "With this," he said, "we'll drag every last one of them into the light." But the road ahead wasn't clear. In Congress, the scandal split lawmakers in two. Conservative leaders hailed Homan as a champion. A fiery Texas congressman declared on the House floor, "Homan did what others feared to do. He struck at the heart of corruption." But liberal senators pushed back, claiming Homan's true goal was to fortify harsh immigration policies. "He's no hero," a California senator snapped on national television. "He's using this scandal as a smokescreen." The firestorm grew when a congressional committee announced public hearings on judicial ethics. Rebecca Leon would be their first key witness. She spent sleepless nights preparing, knowing this wasn't just about Callahan anymore. It was about tearing open a system built on backroom deals and blindfolded justice. Outside Congress, advocacy groups also picked their sides. A conservative campaign, Support Homan, Defend Justice, collected thousands of signatures in days. Meanwhile, liberal activists staged protests, hoisting banners. Protect immigrants, stop judicial abuse. The battle was no longer just legal. It was cultural, political, and deeply personal. And somewhere in the heart of it all, Tom Homan stood silent, unshaken, a man who had unleashed a storm bigger than anyone could have imagined, and who knew the fight had only just begun. An activist's post on X sparked another wave of debate. Homan may be right about Callahan, but don't forget he's still behind thousands of deportations. Thousands liked it, revealing the deep fracture in public opinion. For some, Homan was a hero. For others, he was a reminder of painful wounds still open. In an old tavern tucked away in Washington's maze of alleys, a few lawmakers gathered, over whiskey and whispers. The air smelled of old wood and newer fears. Homan opened a dangerous door, one said, voice low. If they dig into other judges, the whole system could collapse. Another leaned closer, his words heavier. Or maybe, he said, it'll finally force us to clean it up. Silence fell between them. Both knew. The future was uncertain, and no one knew how deep the rot went. Senator John Harrow stood alone in his office, staring out at the Capitol, the city bathed in twilight. His proposed bill was just the beginning, a single stone tossed into dark waters. But maybe, just maybe, it would ripple into something bigger. He thought of Homan, the man who had lit the first match, and wondered if Washington had the courage to walk through the fire he'd started. Elsewhere, Rebecca Leon sat in a cluttered office, flipping through pages of testimony. She felt the weight of the coming hearings pressing down on her, but refused to flinch. The Callahan case had torn the mask off the system. Now it was time to show the world what lay beneath. Rebecca wasn't fighting for fame. She was fighting to honor the truth that Homan had dragged into the light. Back in Denver, the sunset painted the courthouse in fiery colors, as if the sky itself was trying to heal the bruises left behind. Tom Homan stood at the stone steps, reporters swarming, microphones jabbing at him like spears. He said only one sentence, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Justice isn't something you hold or wear. It's a fire burning for truth. And I'll keep that fire alive. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then the cameras flashed, and the reporters scrambled. But Homan had already turned away, leaving them chasing echoes of a legacy just beginning. In a small Washington office, Rebecca Lust sat alone under a flickering lamp, documents scattered around her like fallen leaves. The Callahan case wasn't just a victory. It was a warning shot across the bow of a broken system. She knew the hearings would be a battlefield where the truth would be twisted. But she smiled. To herself. Homan had taught her. The truth, though battered and bruised, was always worth the fight. A few blocks away, Maria Rodriguez sat at her kitchen table, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. A letter from her lawyer trembled in her hands. Her children could stay in the U.S., at least for now. She whispered a prayer, not just for her family, but for the man who had dared to shake the system that so often crushed people like her. In a quiet town miles from Denver, Daniel Foster opened a fresh notebook. The first line he wrote was simple. I'm no hero, I just chose to stand for the truth. The veteran's letter still rested safely in his drawer, a silent reminder that courage, even trembling, terrified courage, mattered. At a bustling community center, Emily Johnson stood before a room full of wide-eyed immigrant children. Her voice was gentle but steady as she spoke. I used to think justice was easy, but it demands courage. One small girl raised her hand shyly. Were you scared? Emily smiled, thinking of sleepless nights and whispered fears. Yes, she said, but fear can't stop the truth. In their faces she saw seeds planted, seeds that could grow into something stronger than the system that had once seemed unbreakable. Homan's fire spread further than any courtroom. In a Seattle cafe, a barista shared an article about him, with a coworker whispering, if he could do it, maybe we can too. In a Florida school, a teacher led her students through a debate about ethics and courage, asking, what would you do when faced with injustice? Tiny ripples in a vast lake, ripples that could someday become waves, yet the biggest question hung heavy over the nation. Could the system truly reform? Or was this just the first battle in a much longer war? Homan, in a rare moment of solitude, thought back on his journey, from dusty Texas borders to sleepless nights under law books, from fear to resolve. He never sought glory. All he wanted was a country where truth couldn't be smothered by power. His legacy wouldn't be headlines or statues. It would be in the quiet bravery of people like Maria, Daniel, Emily, ordinary souls who chose to stand when it mattered most. As the sun finally sank behind the horizon, Tom Homan stood tall, knowing new battles loomed. The system would fight back. The powerful would not yield easily. But he also knew something even stronger. With truth in your hand, nothing is impossible. And somewhere, in classrooms, in cafes, in small kitchens across America, the fire he had kindled still burned, waiting for the next to carry it forward. The lesson from Tom Homan's story is clear. Every individual, whether an ordinary soul like Daniel Foster or a determined official like Homan, holds the power to change the system by standing up for the truth. In real life, it begins with small choices that ripple outward. Prepare diligently like Homan, who spent sleepless nights gathering the facts. Be courageous like Foster and Emily, who risked everything for what was right. And raise your voice like Laia Martinez, who refused to let the truth be buried. Don't turn away from injustice. Don't let fear silence you. Seek the truth, build alliances, take action. Because as Tom Homan said so simply yet so powerfully, justice is a fire burning for truth. And only by keeping that fire alive can we build a fairer society, one where power cannot conceal wrongdoing, and where truth, no matter how fragile, shines through. Subscribe to the channel to continue following the fight for justice, and don't miss the next video, where we'll uncover even more astonishing truths. Thank you for watching, and remember, the fire still burns.